Politicians are busy crisscrossing our country, trying to convince us that they have the best vision for Canada. After all, we are going to the polls on September 20th. The polls at the end of last week have shifted, something many of us wouldn't have necessarily predicted, since the shift doesn't favor the Liberals who called the election. And there have been many happenings on the trail, including a tweet from Liberal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, flagged by Twitter itself as manipulative, People's Party leader Maxime Bernier being not invited to the leaders' debate, yet polling over the Greens in some polls. And what's on the mind of young voters? Are they paying attention? Later in the program, I will be joined by Hannah Salomon-Vey, political commentator. But joining me now to unpack all of the election issues and the related events is our election panel with Conservative commentator Vonnie Sweetland, Laurie Thronis, former BC Liberal MLA and former Chief of Staff to Conservative Agricultural, Aboriginal and Transport Ministers, and Elliott Hughes, Senior Advisor with Summa Strategies and former advisor to Liberal Finance and Defence Ministers. Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. Again, lots has happened. I keep thinking in the doldrums of summer that things would be a little quieter, but I guess there hasn't been a quiet day on this campaign so far. And maybe we'll start with you, Laurie. We've seen that the Liberal Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, she seemed to have landed, I guess, in some kind of hot water due to her clipping a video or showing a video which alleged that Erin O'Toole was in favor of privatized health care. Twitter, of all people, branded it as misinformation. Could you explain a little bit of what happened there?
Well, they're accusing the Conservatives of backtracking on universal health care, and they did it by splicing very badly quotes to make it look like Erin O'Toole was backing off on his commitment to universal health care. What struck me about this was that the Liberals are really reverting very early in the campaign to hot-button issues like abortion and universal health care, and they're starting with that quite early. Usually they leave it till a little later, and that suggests to me that the positive Liberal campaign is weak, and so they're quickly being forced to the fear-based approach. And I think we're going to see more of that in the election.
Well, perhaps it's working, though, because, correct me if I'm wrong, and Elliot, you can jump in here, but didn't just last week, when pressed back-to-back on over 2 days, Erin O'Toole flip-flopped on his leadership commitment to conscience rights protection for doctors? Maybe this is a good strategy after all.
Yeah, I guess full disclosure, the interviewer in that video is actually a colleague of mine, Kate Harrison. So I just want to make sure everyone sort of knows that.
Sure.
Putting that aside, obviously the video was a bit clumsy and it's a bit embarrassing for Minister Freeland, but and I actually don't think it is in fact needed. I think Erin O'Toole seems to be tying himself in knots around his position on healthcare just fine without having to, have the Liberals point this out and in a sloppy video at that. I do agree with Laurie, though. It is interesting from a strategic perspective, seeing where the Liberals are going early on in the campaign. To your earlier sort of intro there, yeah, there's a lot going on in the campaign, but I think that's inside the Ottawa election bubble, so to speak. I think largely Canadians haven't tuned into the election yet, and that probably won't happen until post-Labor Day, which will be, a rock and roll couple of weeks.
Right. Good point. I have to, full disclosure for me, I'm a bit of an election geek, so I feed off this. But the average Canadian, you're right, maybe they're still trying to suck in the last few weeks before back to school, before potentially another fall lockdown, who knows?